We all want to feel peace in our lives. Peace in our choices, our beliefs, our relationships, and our environment. I've learned that this desired contentment is often found through holding on to less. When we pare down what we own, what we consume, and what we value, we're left with what's intentional, a personalized curation of what is important and true and useful to us. I'm Shannon Leyko, and you're listening to Paring Down, a podcast aimed at helping you declutter not only your home, but any area of your life that's overwhelming. Here, we're having interesting and honest conversations about the physical and mental clutter that drowns out what truly matters to each of us. And together, we'll learn how to pare it all down, not for the sake of perfection or becoming rigid, rather so we can move through life with less overwhelm and more joy, wisdom, and peace. Hi, everyone. We're back. It's already Tuesday again. Can you believe it if you're listening live? Or if you're like me and the rest of the world and you just listen to podcasts on random days, not the days they come out, then just like, hi, on whatever day you're listening. But there are some of you who are creatures of habit. My husband's one of those. He listens to Science Fridays. And so obviously that comes out on Friday. I mean, hello, that's some pretty good marketing right there. Paring Down Tuesdays doesn't have the same ring as Science Fridays. But anyways, some people like my husband have specific podcasts they listen to on certain days of the week. And to that, I say, I can tell you have a commute. I don't have a commute, and therefore I listen to podcasts at random, usually when I am, what do you know, decluttering. So anyway, that's a little tangent about podcast release days. I don't know, but you're welcome. So welcome back to the podcast. I went on a road trip recently in our camper van. Have I told you guys that we have a camper van? This is a relatively new thing in the Leyko household. I had always wanted to pack up and like live out of a van down by the river. I don't know. It's just always called to me. And my mother used to say that when she retired, she wanted to get a little camper van and just travel the country and go on adventures. And unfortunately, she passed away before that could happen. So I also felt like, oh man, that would be such a cool way to honor her, is to do that. Because I always loved the story she told that after high school graduation, she and her boyfriend at the time, this was in the 70s, right? They took his van and went on a 2-month summer road trip across the entire border of Canada. She was in San Diego, so they drove up the coast of California and then across Canada and back, and just, had a good time camping on the side of the road, essentially. I mean, this is before cell phones or anything like that. And so I can only imagine my grandmother being like, you're going to do what, you age 18-year-old crazy person? I just think that sense of adventure that my mom had is so cool. And therefore, I have kind of adapted that and adopted that, I should say, in my own life. So long story long, we got a camper van just a couple of months ago. And it has 2 beds that are essentially queen size beds, bunked in the back. And then right in front of those beds is a bench where we can fit our 3 kids' car seats like little sardines right next to each other. And then, of course, Aaron and me up front. And we have 2 dogs that it's it's a full house in there. And it's been really fun. And we took it all the way to Ohio, where it was from where we live in Florida, 15 and a half hours there and then 15 and a half hours back. And we split it up into 2 days so we could stay at a campsite. And it was just the best time. So the point is that we were on the long road trip. Do you believe that I have a point? Do you trust me? The point is we were on this road trip, and Aaron and I decided to listen to an audiobook while the children were sleeping and or playing on their iPads, because they don't get handheld screens unless we are on a road trip longer than 3 hours. That's just how we do it in our house. Obviously, I don't care how you do it. No judgment. They get TV at home, but they don't get handhelds. That way, if we're on an airplane or a very long road trip, they don't bother me. Or other people if we're on an airplane. So they were doing their thing. Aaron and I popped in, shared AirPods, and I turned on a book that every man wants to hear, which is a dictionary about our emotions. Lucky him. Anyway, Brene Brown wrote a book called Atlas of the Heart. If you haven't read it, I highly suggest. And it's about basically being able to name what we're feeling and why that's important, and then walks us through all the different emotions that we might feel and how to identify them, what the difference is between some of them, and all of that. And believe it or not, Aaron, even though he did admit that when I said this is what we're going to listen to, a part of his soul died. But then he actually really enjoyed it. And after the first rest stop, we had listened for about an hour. And I was like, okay, babe, thank you so much for doing that with me. That was great. However, I don't blame you if you want to put Science Friday or whatever you want to listen to about like the History Channel that would make me want to poke my eyes out. If you want to put that back on, I support you. And he was like, actually, I've been pleasantly surprised. This book is really intriguing. I'm really enjoying it. And let's listen to it. And we listened to it the whole drive home. So it's that good. And as I was listening, I was so inspired to want to do a podcast episode about what decluttering brings up for us emotionally, because that's a big one. I mean, when a lot of people reach out to me in DMs or even just in personal life, and they know that I have this podcast about decluttering, so people will bring it up. And a lot of times those conversations revolve around our feelings, right? Like whether it's pride or accomplishment or sentimentality, things that are not bad emotions. Some of them are very good emotions, or it might be those negative emotions, those feelings of shame or sadness or whatever. And so since these conversations are happening in my little world, I figured this would be a great thing to bring up on the podcast, because hopefully then you can also relate, because we're all just little people here and I'm just your little friend in your ear. If we don't know each other in real life, I am your ear friend. And so let's be ear friends and talk about the things my real life friends and I talk about. Okay, so I am going to basically walk through different emotions in Atlas of the Heart in Brene Brown's book that stood out to me as emotions you might feel when decluttering. And I was going to make this podcast episode like the top 5 emotions you feel when decluttering. And then I was going through all of them and I was like, I cannot choose 5. That is so not representative of the human experience, because I can feel like 70 different emotions all at the same time. Just me? No? So I don't know how many we have. I mean, I could count them out for you. I have them all written in front of me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 of them. I chose 13 of the 87. I think there's 87 in her book. So you're welcome. Okay. I pared it down. I pared it down from 87 to 13. And I promise this is not going to feel just like an academic regurgitation of her book, not only because that would be really boring, but also because of copyright. So if I'm being honest, I have no idea if what I'm doing right now is like copyright infringement. So if this gets taken down in a couple of months, just like forgive me. Okay. And Brene, if you hear me, just, in your team, forgive me. I just am basically using her definitions instead of looking at the definitions for these different emotions in like Webster, which I think is valid, right? Because I mean, it's the Atlas of the Heart. It's the dictionary of emotions. I'm going to refer to the definitions. So hopefully I don't get sued for $1 billion. Also, I don't have $1 billion. So you guys aren't going to win much, but okay. Let's start. You guys should get like 5 gold stars every day for listening to me. Just make a chart and be like, today I put up with Shannon's rants on her podcast. Okay. So the first emotions I want to address, I feel like are the ones that come up the most when we talk about decluttering, and that is stress and overwhelm. And I think sometimes those two things are used kind of interchangeably, but they are not the same thing. So as Brene puts it, excuse me, stress is when we cannot cope successfully with the demands. So just the demand is too much, versus overwhelm is an extreme level of stress to the point of not being able to function. So if you kind of try and pick up your house every day, but you just cannot keep up with it, you just cannot keep up with the housework, you're stressed about it. If you don't even try, if you end up like just throwing dirty dishes in the trash can because they've been sitting in your sink for a couple of months, or you just continue to buy underwear at the store because you haven't washed the ones you already own, that's probably a sign of overwhelm where you just can't even move. You just like cannot do anything about it. She gives an example in her book to differentiate between those two emotions or two experiences. Not all of these are emotions. Some of them are experiences that lend themselves to why we feel the things we do. But anyways, the example she gives is when she worked at a restaurant, and immediately when she said she was giving an example of this because of the restaurant business, I knew what she was going to say, because I too worked in a restaurant in New York City. You guys, when I was 20, I guess I was 23 when I moved up to New York, and I had 1 year of waitressing experience in Virginia at Cheeseburger in Paradise. I mean, the classiest of classies, RIP Jimmy Buffett. And I did that for a year in Virginia specifically because I knew that I needed to get a job waiting tables in New York in order to support myself as a starving artist when I was pursuing Broadway and singing and all that jazz. And I ended up somehow by the grace of God, and to the dismay of my coworkers, getting hired at this very high-end steakhouse in Times Square called Bond 45. And it's mostly like career waiters, like mostly men, if I'm being honest, that were all in their like 30s to 50s who made 6 figures a year waiting tables, like that kind of a restaurant where you wear a penguin suit. I was in a black bow tie and white shirt and that whole thing. And I walked in there without realizing how nice it was, just like walking around the city, literally trying to find a job. And I just strolled in there because I saw that it was a restaurant. And I started walking right back out because I was like, I am not qualified to work here. I cannot open a wine bottle without the rabbit. And anyway, the manager caught me and I was like, do you want me to hostess? Like, can I hostess? And he's like, do you have waitressing experience? And I told him yes. And long story, again, long. I am not paring down my stories today to become short little segments for you. But anyway, I ended up getting this job at this high-end steakhouse, and all of the other waiters were like, what is she doing here? Like, the bartender had to actually teach me how to use a wine key because you have to open the bottles of wine at the table. I can talk about stress, okay? That is the most stressful experience that any one human can ever have. Whenever there is a waiter or waitress opening a wine bottle at the table for me, I just keep the conversation going because I know that helps them. Nobody wants to be stared at when you're trying to get a cork out of a bottle, especially if it's starting to break. Like, it's horrifying. So please just keep the conversation going. Just be like, how's your day going? How are you? That's what I would try and do as the waiter. I would try and talk to them so that they were not looking at my hands. And I was like shaking. Oh gosh, I have so many stories. I have so many stories from waiting tables. But the point is when you are waiting tables, there is something that happens called being in the weeds. And that means that you have had way too many people ask you for way too many things and you do not have time to get everything to them. So like table 1 needs ketchup, table 2 has food sitting in the window that needs to be run, table 3 needs water poured, table 4 needs their check, table 5 needs to have their order taken, and you need to fire the food on table whatever. Like, it is fire meaning basically push a button on the computer and it tells the kitchen to start cooking it. So they get it at kind of the correct time based on when they sat. So there's a lot going on. And when you're in a restaurant like mine where everybody was coming in before a show, so we would have like a huge rush on Wednesdays for like the matinee. And then of course in the evenings before a Broadway show, it just was, you had to get people out at a certain time so that they can make their show. And so you would be in the weeds, meaning there's too much to do and you need help and you are extremely stressed. And so maybe a manager or a coworker, another waiter or waitress who is feeling particularly generous that day might be like, are you okay? You say, no, I'm in the weeds. Can you bring a latte to table XYZ and then drop their check for me? Or can you pour waters for table 1? And that's being in the weeds. Being blown is when you have so much to do that you freeze and your brain just shuts off. There's no possible way that you can continue serving these tables because you're just so overwhelmed. I mean, this is the definition of overwhelmed. The difference between stress and overwhelmed is in the weeds is stress. Overwhelmed is when you're blown. And at that point, if you have a good manager or good coworkers, which I did, you would say, I need my 5 minutes. And this happened to me, I think maybe one time. I think it was shortly after my mother passed away. So I also had that going on. But like, I couldn't do it, right? Like 3 of my tables were mad at me. I had brought the wrong food for one. It's just like, there's just so much in your human brain. I'm a pretty smart person. I'm great at multitasking. I was a really good waitress, but like sometimes it's just too much. And at that point, they say, great, we've got it for 5 minutes. And the manager steps in as a waitress, other people help, and they take over your tables. So you can like go to the fridge or go to the locker room that we had and cry, basically. You get like 5 minutes to cry, get yourself together and take some deep breaths, and then you're back at it. So being overwhelmed is when you cannot do anymore. You are blown. And stress is when you are in the weeds. And that obviously shows up a lot when it comes to our homes and decluttering. And I would encourage you that if you are stressed, you're in the right place. I'm glad you're listening to this. Hopefully you're following my Paring Down Instagram account. Like there are ways for you to better cope with what's going on around you in order to declutter. If you are overwhelmed, I highly encourage you to, if you can, have a professional come in and help you get started so that you can get to a place that you're unfrozen, if that makes sense. Like you need somebody to come in and take over a little bit for you and just be very gentle with yourself, because that's a hard place to be in. If you cannot afford someone to come in and help that process when you're overwhelmed, then do what we did in the restaurant industry. Like allow yourself to feel what you need to feel about your house. Like take a second to step back, see the overwhelm, cry if you need to, and then take a very gentle, slow approach to coming back into the space and working on it, which you'll get more tips of how to do that here and on Instagram. So that's stress and overwhelm. Avoidance is a coping strategy for anxiety. So I love that how Brene puts it. She says it's zigzagging around and away from the thing that already feels like it's consuming us. So there's a difference between overwhelm and avoidance. Avoidance is that you're probably stressed and your coping mechanism is to just avoid it and not think about it. Overwhelmed is that your body is not regulated enough to be able to do that. I hope that makes sense. So if you're in that space of avoidance, again, we have to stop zigzagging around the thing, and it's already consuming us. I love how she put that. It already feels like it's consuming us. So avoiding it isn't making us feel any better about it. It's actually not taking anything off of our plate. It's just adding to this weight we feel on our shoulders. So avoidance, we think is a coping strategy, but in reality, it's just making the anxiety sit heavier within us instead of actually just like doing something small, like clearing out one small drawer or one small corner, and that actually alleviates the weight we feel on our shoulders. It's a better coping mechanism for the anxiety and the stress. Another big experience that we all have are expectations when it comes to our decluttering journey. So this is when we paint the picture of how something will go in our heads, right? And there's, I think, kind of like two sides to this. I think we experience expectations when we buy things and bring them into our home. We have an expectation that we will use them and that we will enjoy them. And then we also have an expectation for the decluttering process itself, that how long it's going to take and how easy it's going to be and all of that. So a lot of times what we experience when decluttering is discouragement. I said that weird. Discouragement and resignation. The difference between discouragement and resignation is this. In discouragement, Brene says, I am losing my confidence and enthusiasm and my motivation to keep going. That's discouragement. Resignation is I've already lost those things. I have given up my confidence. I've lost my confidence and my enthusiasm that I can do this. I've lost that motivation. And a lot of times those are because of expectations, right? That we feel discouraged because it's not living up to expectations. So when we realize we haven't used something that we own for a long time, we might feel really discouraged when we see it, and disappointed would be another one that falls into this category. And we might even just become resigned to the fact that we're never going to use it again, and that resignation might actually be a good thing in this case, right? Because you realize that this is just not going to happen. Like, I'm just not going to use the ice cream maker that I was so excited to buy and had all these big expectations. And the picture in my head was doing this with my kids over the summer or whatever. And you become resigned about that. And that's actually kind of helpful in the decluttering world. But what we don't want resignation for is when we resign ourselves to the clutter and say, this is just the way life is going to be, because that is not, it does not have to be true. I would rather have somebody who's in a discouraged state saying, I don't really know where to go from here. I just wish I didn't have all this stuff to begin with. And it's taking a lot longer than I thought, because they're still like, but I want to figure this out. I want to keep going. I'm really discouraged with how it's going. Or I'm discouraged that I was the kind of person in the past that bought things that I'm never going to use, right? That is better than someone who is resigned and saying, well, this is just how it's going to be, because then they've lost that motivation and that enthusiasm. So if you're feeling discouraged, just remember that that's actually a good sign. That means you're not yet resigned. So pick yourself back up, say, maybe I need to take a break today. Maybe I need to adjust my expectations. That is what that says. I need to adjust my expectations. What I've painted in my head is just not reality. And that's okay. So let's think about what is reality and where do we go from there. All right. The next emotion, this is a big one, is shame. She says, and as we know, Brene Brown is like the shame researcher. She is an academic and she studies shame and vulnerability specifically. So this part of her book was a longer chapter. But the way she defines shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love, belonging, and connection. So this is an identity piece here. You know, guilt might look like, oh man, I wish I hadn't spent so much money on this thing that I never use. And I feel bad about it. Like, I feel negatively about that choice. And there's a difference between guilt and remorse, and she goes over that in the book as well. But anyways, guilt is more of identifying a behavior that did not align with your values as a human. Shame is an identity. It's saying, I am bad. I am not a mature, a worthy human because I can't keep my house clean. Like, there's a lot of shame in it. Like, I am not good. And I think sometimes we think that when we see our house filled with all this stuff, we think, ew, like, what kind of person just buys and falls for advertisements and can't keep her house clean and isn't giving her children the childhood experience they should have in a healthy home, and you know, their clothes are wrinkled, or I forgot to wash their pants in time. And like, you start to think like you're a bad mom, you're a bad person, or just like an unworthy person. Those are the feelings of shame. And we can feel that a lot as we start to assess our stuff in our house. And that is not a productive emotion. We can use guilt. We can use remorse. I mean, those feelings, while we don't want to linger in them, can serve as motivation. You can say, okay, that didn't align with my values. I feel guilty about that purchase, or about bringing that to my home, or about how that's affecting my kids. And therefore, now I know how I want to change because I see how that's not aligning with my values. There's some productivity in that. But shame, where we take it on as an identity of self-worth, is not productive. So I want you to move out of that space while you're decluttering. Release the shame, because you are not defined by your housekeeping and your stuff. We also experience some perfectionism, striving to have it all done perfectly. Internally driven striving is a good thing, right? That's like self-motivation. I'm an internal striver. Like, I want to do this because I know it'll feel good. That's fine. If you are experiencing that, I'm all for it. Perfectionism, as why do I keep saying Renee? Golly day. Brene Brown puts it, is externally driven. We're striving in a way that is concerned with what other people will think. And we might think that perfectionism is us. It's like just an internal experience. But really, if you really pare it down, if you get to the root of it, it's that we are worried what other people are going to think of what we are presenting to them, and to the world, with our art, with our home, with our work, with whatever it is that you are perfectionist about, cleanliness. I don't know what it is for you. It's externally driven. Like, what will others think? So we have to take that out and really, okay, are we doing this for internally driven striving reasons? That is good, because that focuses more on function, right? Like, I want to make our house decluttered because it will calm my heart, because it will give me more bandwidth to do things I actually love, because I want to have clean clothes to wear, because I don't want to have to step over these piles because it's really annoying when I walk into my closet. Those are internally driven. They are not externally driven. So that's the difference between, internal striving versus perfectionism. A good one that we might feel while we're decluttering is self-compassion. This is a warm and understanding feeling towards ourselves. Like, we're feeling warmth and we're feeling understanding. We're saying, hey, like, I get why I made that purchase. I understand why this stuff has brought me comfort. Maybe it is a response to not having enough in my past. Maybe it's because it reminds me of my childhood home. Maybe it's because I love being alive so much that I love to like buy little tchotchkes that remind me, like souvenirs of where I've been, or keep gifts that other people have given me. And you have this like warmth and understanding about why you've made some of the decisions you have that has created the clutter, or why it might be so hard for you to let go of the clutter. And self-compassion is a beautiful thing to have. And we can have that self-compassion, which then gives us the energy to make different choices moving forward, and kind of embrace some of these mental reframes about what our stuff means to us. And obviously, some of the other really great feelings or experiences we might have when it comes to decluttering is calm. As Brene puts in her book, calm is creating perspective and mindfulness while managing emotional reactivity. I'm going to read that again. Calm is creating perspective and mindfulness while managing emotional reactivity. So if you think of somebody who is calm, they usually have a perspective that is bigger than whatever's happening in this one moment in front of them, and they can manage their emotional reactivity. I mean, I would like to be more calm, especially towards my children. And when our space is calm around us, it allows our hearts and bodies to feel a sense of calm that then allows us to not have that emotional reactivity. That gives us a bigger perspective. What is most important? And we can find that contentment, which is the next piece, the next experience that I wanted to share from her book. And that is the feeling of enoughness, or that our needs are satisfied. Our needs are satisfied with contentment. And I think this is a big one when it comes to decluttering, is remembering that we don't have to define success by what everyone else in the world and the consumerism driven culture says is successful. Contentment is enoughness, knowing that our needs are satisfied. And what are our needs? Our biggest ones are shelter, belonging, with other people, and spiritual needs. Those are things that really don't have a whole lot to do with stuff. And so we can find contentment with very little stuff, and that then feeds our calm. And another good one is gratitude. As she says in her book, gratitude makes us appreciate the value of something. And when we appreciate the value of something, we extract more benefits from it. We're less likely to take it for granted. And with gratitude, we notice the positives more. And that magnifies the pleasures you get from life. Instead of adapting to goodness, we celebrate goodness. We become greater participants in our lives as opposed to spectators. That is a direct quote from Atlas of the Heart. And it spoke to me so much that with gratitude, we notice these positives more often. which helps us not just adapt to goodness, because, right, like as humans, we just adapt to goodness. It's like, if you think about like a drug addiction, you need more and more and more because you adapt to it so much. Same thing. The more we say, I'm just so grateful for my health, then we kind of adapt to that. And it's not like, it doesn't have hold as much meaning to us anymore. But if we live actively in gratitude and continue to notice more and more positives, or to reinforce within ourselves our gratitude for those positives, then we're celebrating goodness, celebrating it instead of just adapting to it being all around us without even noticing. And I love how she says that it makes us greater participants in our lives instead of just spectators. Because when we're grateful for things, we're present, we're mindful, our eyes are opened. We take part in it as a response to our gratitude. Otherwise, we're just kind of letting life pass us by as spectators and not really participating unless we notice the good parts that make us want to participate. I just think that's a really beautiful point about gratitude. And when we're decluttering, we can say thank you so much to our stuff. We can feel a sense of gratitude for the things that we do have, the things that we don't need, the things that we are not in need of, and find the beauty in the world around us that is not in stuff. I just love that. The final experience or emotion that I wanted to share is relief. And she says it's a feeling of tension leaving the body. I mean, you cannot find a better definition of how I feel when I declutter than relief. Tension just leaves my body. It is the best feeling in the world. So if you need some motivation, just think about the relief that you are going to feel when you declutter. So I know that these emotions were a little bit all over the place and it covered a lot. But these are the ones that stood out to me in her book that I think apply to decluttering. And I just wanted to point them out and share them with you so that you're not alone in feeling all of these different emotions when you declutter, and hopefully to give you some perspective about what you're feeling, being able to identify it so that you can make decisions accordingly. And so let me read them again. We have stress and overwhelm and avoidance. And she has different chapters. They're places you go when, like feelings you feel when but with the atlas as the theme, it's places you go. So the places we go when we're uncertain or things are too much, the ones that I pulled out for you are stress, overwhelm, and avoidance. Places we go when things don't go as planned. I pulled out expectations, discouragement, and resignation. Places we go when we fall short. Shame, perfectionism, self-compassion. And places we go when life is good. Calm, contentment, gratitude, relief. So if you've ever felt any of those while decluttering, I think that is extremely common. And if you have any more questions about Atlas of the Heart, I'm going to link to it in the show notes so that you can get yourself a copy. Of course, I always love getting things from the library, and my library had a copy, a hard copy, which I got as well to take notes for this podcast. And then on Libby, I was able to get that on the audiobook on Libby for free. So I definitely encourage use of that. But anyways, I will link to it in the show notes if you want to learn more about all these different emotions in order to move through life a little bit more easily, being able to identify your internal experience. But thank you so much for letting me share this with you. I hope that you find it comforting, helpful, motivating, all of the things, and keep them in mind when you're decluttering so that you can shoo away the ones that are unproductive and that we want to reframe and welcome in the emotions that can help move us forward. So that's it for today. You just listened to an episode of Paring Down with me, Shannon Leyko. If you enjoyed the show, it would mean the world if you can leave a review wherever you listen and share this episode with a friend. Those reviews really are what keeps a podcast on its feet for the long haul, and I will read every single one with a huge smile on my face, so thank you ahead of time. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, be sure to follow along on Instagram at Paring Down Podcast, where I offer lots of tips and inspiration for paring down, along with what's new here on the podcast. Till next time.